At 17, Elon Musk wasn't the kind of student you'd notice in a noisy classroom. He was skinny, his hair perpetually tousled, wore thick glasses, and usually sat in the back row, eyes seemingly lost in another place. Not the classroom, but somewhere far away, somewhere bigger. While his classmates chatted about soccer, the latest phones, or the upcoming party, Elon quietly jotted down thoughts about rocket boosters, Mars colonies, and artificial intelligence. He was different, and because of that, he was always an easy target. No one wanted to sit next to Elon during breaks. They called him weird, quirky, hard to talk to, but Elon didn't seem to care. He always carried a notebook, full of scribbled drawings, math formulas, and stories no one had ever read. One day during recess, a group of students saw Elon's notebook fall. They picked it up and burst out laughing. "What's this? Robots talking to humans? Cities floating in the clouds? Hey, Elon, are you writing this for a kid's story contest?" Elon quietly picked up the notebook without saying a word, but his eyes, deep and sad, seemed to quietly absorb another wound. Everything came to a head one Monday morning when Mr. Harold Benson, the famously strict literature teacher, handed back the final essays. The topic was the world 100 years from now, a broad theme that should have encouraged students to dream freely. But for Mr. Benson, imagination still had to fit within logical boundaries. As usual, Elon submitted his paper last. It was 3 times longer than anyone else's, neatly typed, bound, with a slanted title on the cover, "The Future is Not Far." The essay described an epic journey, a team of astronauts leaving Earth to build the first city on Mars, a world where artificial intelligence managed traffic, hospitals, even the justice system, where solar energy became the main life source, where electric cars were no longer luxuries, where instead of war, humanity joined forces to survive in the vastness of space. But as Mr. Harold Benson opened the first few pages, he didn't smile. He frowned, then slowly held up the essay in front of the class. "Our class has a very special submission," he said with a hint of sarcasm. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the back of the class, where Elon sat with his head down. I'll read an excerpt. "We landed on the red ice plains of Mars in the X-9 booster ship, carrying energy sources 20 times more powerful than the old solar batteries. The AI system greeted us, speaking fluent English, and led us into the settlement built by robots in just 72 hours. He paused, then laughed. "If you want to write cheap science fiction, I don't think this classroom is for you. You should apply to be a cartoon scriptwriter. In the real world, people need reason, not fantasies." The class erupted. Laughter filled the room. Someone even clapped as if it were a comedy show. Elon lifted his head but said nothing. His face turned red. His eyes didn't tear up, but the pain was visible. Classmates started whispering to each other, "That's the Mars lunatic. Just wait. One day he'll invent a bug rocket or something. Mom, please don't make me study with that guy anymore." After that day, Elon became more isolated than ever. He stopped writing. Blank pages began replacing the dreamy scribbles. Whenever Mr. Harold walked into the room, Elon would shrink into his seat, trying to disappear. In parent-teacher meetings, Mr. Benson even told Elon's mother, he lives in a fantasy world. He should be sent to life skills classes, not science fiction daydreams. But what no one saw was this. Every night after the world had gone to sleep, Elon kept writing. No grades, no judgment, no one laughing, just Elon and his dream. In those diary pages he wrote, "One day they won't laugh anymore. One day I'll make the impossible feel normal, and they'll have to reread what they once mocked." Elon's essay, "The Future is Not Far," was returned with a C- and a bright red comment from Mr. Harold Benson. Wildly unrealistic. Lacks practicality. Does not meet academic standards. No praise, no constructive feedback, just a cold, definitive judgment, like a red stamp crushing a boy's dream. Elon read that line over and over again, and each time, it squeezed his heart a little tighter. The sleepless nights spent refining each paragraph, the vivid images of a future he had imagined with all the passion of a science-loving teenager, had now all been reduced to one word: unrealistic. For the entire week after, Elon didn't utter a word in literature class. He still carried his notebook out of habit, but the once enthusiastic ink strokes no longer filled the blank pages. Even the light in his eyes seemed to fade. The dreams that once smoldered quietly in his heart, of a pollution-free world, of interplanetary travel, of a society where AI helped the poor access education, suddenly became taboo, something he himself began to question whether he should pursue at all. It wasn't just Mr. Benson. His classmates also contributed to extinguishing the last flames of hope in him. In the hallways, the cafeteria, even after school, whispers floated around him like tiny needles piercing every thought. "What's Mars boy writing now?" one classmate sneered. "Probably designing a toilet for the moon," another quipped. The group burst into laughter. Elon said nothing. He kept his head down, walking faster, hoping to find a quiet corner, somewhere without mockery, without judgment, without the heavy shadow of that essay looming in his mind. Each literature class became torture. Mr. Benson, as if deliberately, would often showcase other students' essays, praising their practicality, spotlighting pieces on finance, law, or traditional careers. Titles like "The Post-Globalization World" and "The Sustainable Development of Conventional Energy Markets" were held up as ideal models. Meanwhile, Elon gradually became the cautionary tale, the dreamer who didn't know when to stop. Sometimes from behind the teacher's desk, Mr. Benson would glance at Elon, not with disappointment, but judgment, as if he had already decided Elon's fate with a single look. Even Elon's family began to notice something had changed. His mother asked, "What's wrong, sweetheart? You haven't talked about your inventions in a while." Elon just shook his head gently. He didn't want to lie, but he couldn't bring himself to explain what had happened in that classroom. How could he tell his mom that the essay he had written with all his heart had been laughed at? How could he describe the feeling of watching a dream be torn apart in front of his classmates and the teacher he once admired? And perhaps the most painful part wasn't even the grade. It was the creeping doubt in himself. He started to wonder, am I really crazy? Are the things I imagine truly foolish? If everyone says I'm wrong, then could I ever be right? It was like falling into an invisible abyss where the seeds of passion and imagination were slowly being crushed. He still went to class, still did his homework, but only to fulfill obligation, not out of eagerness. His notebook, once a vibrant world of colors and ambition, now lay untouched in his desk drawer, a soft layer of dust settling on its cover. The dreams that once burned brightly now sat like quiet ashes. Yet deep within his heart, a place no one had ever seen, a tiny spark still flickered, weak but never fully extinguished. Every night after the lights went out, Elon would quietly turn on his computer and read research papers on quantum physics, blueprints of early rockets, and NASA's most ambitious projects. He no longer sketched spaceships in his notebook like before, but in his mind, they still flew, forming silently, mapping journeys no one had dared to imagine. Maybe the world wasn't ready to understand him. Maybe Mr. Harold Benson was right. Society needs reason. But Elon believed this. Without imagination, how would humanity have discovered electricity, built airplanes, invented the internet, or even dared to dream of the stars. He hadn't fought back, hadn't responded, but somewhere deep in his soul, Elon had made a quiet promise to himself. If one day he could prove that his dream was real, he wouldn't say a word. He'd simply hand back that essay. Let them read it and let them understand. He didn't need to shout to be heard. He just needed to turn what they once called nonsense into reality. And then the whole world would fall silent. Ever since his essay, "The Future Is Not Far," was publicly ridiculed by Mr. Harold Benson and mocked by nearly all his classmates, Elon Musk's school life entered a completely different chapter, quieter, more restrained, and lonelier. But the worst was yet to come. As the school year drew to a close and students began mapping out their futures, choosing majors, applying for scholarships, Elon, who had once been so certain of his dream, found himself more confused than ever. He had long nurtured a burning ambition to become an aerospace engineer, to work in the space industry, to design spacecraft destined for Mars. It wasn't a fleeting teenage fantasy, but a dream he had carried since childhood, built from every science book he read, every model rocket he assembled, every night spent staring through the window at the stars. But now that dream was slowly slipping away. Not because he lacked passion, but because of a flood of reasonable advice from people he once trusted. When Elon expressed his intentions to his homeroom teacher, hoping to get guidance on applying for a scholarship in aerospace engineering at a prestigious university, the response wasn't encouragement or excitement. The teacher looked at him for a moment, then sighed, voice tinged with pity. "Elon, I know you're passionate, but try to be realistic. What do you think the admissions board will think when they see an essay titled 'The Future Is Not Far' that was already labeled as impractical? They're looking for scientific minds, not dreamers writing sci-fi stories." Elon remained silent. He didn't know what to say because any attempt to defend himself would sound like immaturity. The teacher continued a little more gently. "You'd be better off choosing a more practical major. Finance, business administration, or information technology, those fields have clear futures. You'll thank yourself later for making a safe choice." That was the first time Elon felt like he was standing at a crossroads with no path leading to Mars. He carried that confusion home, thinking at least his family would support him. But that hope quickly faded. When he nervously told his mother he still wanted to pursue aerospace engineering, even though others had warned him it was unrealistic, his beloved mother fell quiet for a long time. Then gently, like all mothers do when they worry for their child, she said, "Sweetheart, I don't want to upset you. I just want you to have a stable life. You can still pursue science, but it doesn't have to be space. That field is really hard, and there aren't many opportunities. What if you can't find a job after graduation? I think you should choose finance or IT. Good income, close to home." Elon didn't blame her. He knew she wasn't wrong. No one was wrong. All the advice he received came from care, from love, from the harsh realities of life that everyone eventually faces. But what made his chest tighten was the feeling that, step by step, he was being pulled away from his dream. A dream no one truly saw, no one really understood, and because of that, no one believed was worth sacrificing for, worth pursuing to the end. Maybe if his dream had been to become a doctor, a lawyer, or an architect, things would have been easier. But Elon chose a dream that was too big, too far, too unrealistic. In the days that followed, he began to move through school like a shadow. In class, he sat quietly, took notes, turned in assignments on time, but no longer raised his hand. During career counseling sessions, when teachers asked each student what major they intended to pursue, Elon simply said, "I'm still thinking." His friends were already preparing their applications, practicing scholarship interviews, attending study abroad consultations. Meanwhile, Elon felt like someone standing outside the door, no longer sure where he was headed. He felt like he was drifting, not in space, but in his own life. Every choose something safer, every sympathetic glance, every reminder to stop dreaming felt like invisible ropes pulling him away from the destination in his heart. He tried writing another essay, something more reasonable, about solar energy. But the more he wrote, the more lost he felt. It wasn't his voice. It wasn't his world. Sometimes as he passed the library, Elon would pause in front of the science fiction section. He had read everything there, from Asimov to Clarke, Bradbury to Sagan. Those books had once lit up his imagination, had once been the place where he felt he belonged. But now he only stared at them from a distance, like a stranger. He didn't dare open one, afraid that just turning a page would bring all the pain rushing back. Then one night, after turning down an invitation to apply for a prestigious finance scholarship at a top university, Elon sat alone in his room, the glow of the computer screen in front of him. He looked at the application form for a lesser-known university offering a degree in aerospace engineering, the only place that didn't require a personal essay, only transcripts and recommendation letters. His hand trembled. The mouse cursor hovered over the apply button. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then he clicked. No one saw that moment. There were no fireworks, no applause. Just one young man, once called the Mars lunatic, daring to take a very small, but very real step towards something the whole world had told him was impossible. The night Elon quietly pressed the apply button for an aerospace engineering program at a modest university might have seemed insignificant to the world. But for him, it was the very first moment he truly stood against everything to protect his dream. No applause, no belief, no congratulations. And yet at that exact moment, something was reborn inside him. Not the innocence of a child who once dreamed amid the laughter of classmates, but a belief that had been forged through pain, tested by isolation, and now began to grow in silence. Elon no longer needed cheerleaders. He no longer waited for anyone to understand. All he needed was a path, narrow, dark, uncertain, as long as it led him to the sky. In college, Elon became a different person. No noise, no debates, no need to prove anything to anyone. He immersed himself in studies, from astrophysics to fluid dynamics, from AI programming to microchip design. While his peers spent weekends at parties, Elon stayed in the library late into the night, sitting alone at a corner desk with his old laptop and a stack of thick textbooks. He didn't study to get good grades. He studied to understand, to absorb every concept until it became part of him. He no longer wrote science fiction essays for teachers. Instead, he wrote for himself, design drafts, bold concepts, technical journals blending scientific theory with visions of the future. Elon documented everything in his digital notebook, a space with no grades, no mockery, no judgment. The wounds from high school were still there, but they no longer stopped him. They became a cocoon that wrapped around a maturing soul, nurturing someone who would never give up just because he was rejected. In lab sessions, Elon was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. He didn't smile much, didn't join in meaningless conversations. But whenever he spoke about technology, his eyes lit up, as if a piece of Mars had just appeared before him. His classmates still found him different, but no one dared to call him the Mars lunatic anymore. He had become too good, too focused, too resolute to be dismissed again. After graduation, while many peers sought secure jobs at major companies, Elon once again went against the current. He didn't apply for a job. He founded a small research group, then a tech startup called SpaceX, with a mission so bold that everyone thought it was insane. to launch humanity beyond Earth and pave the way for multiplanetary life. Once again, the world laughed. The media labeled Elon an ambitious madman, a modern-day Jules Verne trapped in an era ruled by money and pragmatism. Investors shook their heads. They couldn't understand why a young man with no fame, no powerful backers, believed he could do what even NASA hadn't fully achieved. But Elon didn't explain, didn't promise, didn't defend. He just worked quietly, relentlessly, step by step. SpaceX endured countless failures. There were rocket explosions right on the launch pad, moments when the budget was nearly gone, times when the whole team survived on instant noodles. But Elon never gave up, because he knew if he quit now, then all those sleepless nights, all the laughter, all the torn-up pages would mean nothing. Then 10 years after the essay, "The Future is Not Far," was graded to see, SpaceX successfully launched its first rocket into orbit, marking a historic milestone. For the first time, a private company had achieved what once only governments dared to dream. But destiny wasn't done yet. To receive national research certification and scale the project through federal collaboration, SpaceX had to present its proposal to an independent science and education review board, tasked with evaluating both the technical feasibility and long-term vision of the mission. And on the list of panel members that day was a name that made Elon pause for a few seconds. Harold Benson, the same literature teacher, now retired, now serving as a senior academic advisor, invited to the panel for his expertise in evaluating youth innovation and realism in educational visions. None other than the man who once stood before an entire class, holding Elon's essay and reading it aloud with sarcasm, declaring, "In the real world, people need logic, not fantasies." Elon didn't smile. He wasn't scared. He wasn't bitter. He just took a deep breath and reopened the presentation folder. Inside, he had included a short essay, not a technical report, not a simulation chart, but a rewritten version of "The Future is Not Far," this time in a mature voice shaped by experience, backed by the real results SpaceX had achieved. At the end of the essay, Elon added a single line, "To Mr. Harold Benson, the first person who ever called this dream unrealistic." He knew this meeting would be different, not because he wanted revenge, but because this time Elon brought something no grade, no criticism could ever deny. The review meeting that day was held in a large glass conference room on the top floor of a research facility belonging to the Federal Institute of Science and Education. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, casting a golden hue across a long table where advisors were receiving thick folders from the secretary, documents that carried the future of the projects up for potential government funding. Among those documents was a plain white folder bearing the subtle SpaceX logo and the title, "Transforming the Future, The Journey Beyond the Atmosphere." It was slid in front of a silver-haired man sitting at the far right corner of the table. He wore black-rimmed glasses, sat upright, though his hands trembled slightly. Harold Benson. It had been years since he'd stepped away from the classroom, retiring quietly after 30 years of teaching. Time had lowered his voice, dimmed his vision, but his memories of teaching had never faded. He was still frequently invited to consult on education-related research projects, valued for his sharp analytical mind and his reputation for assessing students with practical potential. And Harold took pride in that, believing he had spent a career guiding young people towards safe, effective, real futures. But as he opened the first page of the SpaceX folder, his eyes paused. A name so familiar it made him freeze for a moment. Elon Musk. Printed in bold, clear letters just above the title, Founder and Chief Executive Officer. He squinted, trying to make sure he had read it right, as a strange wave of recognition surged from a forgotten corner of his memory. An old classroom, chalkboards, student essays, and a skinny boy sitting in the back, always staring out the window. He turned the pages and began to read. The opening sections detailed the Falcon rocket technology, so precise and thorough that even the engineers on the committee nodded in approval. Every diagram, every thrust simulation, every figure on fuel efficiency, orbital mechanics and control systems was presented clearly, scientifically, and convincingly. But what truly left Harold Benson speechless wasn't the cutting-edge tech. It was a slim attachment tucked quietly in the appendix. Its title hit him like a jolt. The future is not far, 10 years later. His hands trembled as he opened the first page. The very first line pierced through time like an arrow. To the teacher who once said that imagination doesn't put food on the table, but because of that statement, I learned how to turn imagination into reality. Harold didn't blink for the next 15 minutes. He read the essay, not as a student's assignment, but as a chronicle of a journey. In it, Elon recounted his high school years, the feeling of being dismissed, the self-doubt, and the long nights studying alone under a dim lamp. He didn't just talk about dreams, he documented each step taken to make them real. Photos of SpaceX's first launch pad, engine design blueprints, keynote speeches at global science summits, international collaboration certificates, success graphs after dozens of failed attempts. It was no longer science fiction. It was reality, written in sweat, perseverance, and a decade of unwavering determination. And now the very man who once criticized the original version of that essay, who had called it unrealistic, impractical, and unacademic, was holding in his hands its triumphant, undeniable evolution. Harold sat still, eyes misting. No one in the room understood why he had gone silent. They only saw that he wasn't turning another page. He bowed his head, then looked up and spoke for the first time in the meeting. I was once the teacher of the person who wrote this, and I would like to be the first to sign off on this project. No one objected. No one asked why. The essay and the entire proposal had said it all, but only Harold Benson truly understood. He wasn't just signing off on a project. He was signing an apology, late but sincere, to the student whose dream he had once dismissed. He was acknowledging that imagination, when paired with discipline, resilience, and sheer will, doesn't just put food on the table. It can take humanity beyond this planet. As he gently folded the essay and set it back in front of him, his hands slightly shaking, he glanced out the tall windows. The sky that afternoon was brilliantly blue, just like the sky a 17-year-old boy once gazed at through a classroom window, dreaming of journeys far beyond the limits of anyone else's imagination. And Harold smiled. Not the smile of a consultant, not the smile of a teacher, but the smile of a man who had once been wrong and was now grateful to witness that mistake be rewritten by the greatness of someone he had once called a foolish dreamer. The review session ended in an unusual silence, as if everyone in the room needed a few extra moments to process what they had just witnessed. The SpaceX proposal, its technology, vision, feasibility, and deeply human impact didn't just exceed the committee's expectations. It forced each member to ask themselves, have we ever truly believed in the power of what once seemed impossible? In the corner of the table, Harold Benson remained seated, deep in thought. In front of him lay "The Future Is Not Far," no longer a fledgling student essay, but a quiet manifesto from someone who had spent their entire youth proving a single truth: that imagination, when nurtured with ambition and discipline, can become a reality stronger than any argument. He reached for his pen and turned to the final section of the evaluation form, where each committee member was to assign a score and write their remarks. After decades as a teacher, having graded thousands of papers and signed countless forms, never once had Harold felt his hand tremble like this. Not from age, But because, for the first time in his life, he was about to write down 2 letters he had always reserved for what he considered undeniably deserved. 2 letters, a plus. Before the red ink could dry, he added a short line, no embellishment, no lengthy explanation, but waited with a lifetime of reflection. Thank you for not listening to me back then. From Harold's perspective, this was no longer just a technical review. It was a quiet miracle, a moment where a teacher who once dismissed a dream now watched it blossom into brilliance before his eyes. The student he once told to be more realistic had now made the entire world dream bigger. Elon Musk was no longer the skinny kid at the back of the classroom, staring out the window. He was no longer the boy mocked as the Mars lunatic among snickering classmates. He was now the one opening the actual gateway to space for humanity, a symbol of a generation willing to think the unthinkable and walk paths the world called impossible. A few weeks later, the results were announced through official channels. SpaceX was awarded national funding certification, becoming the first private company in history authorized to develop an interplanetary rocket program under government endorsement. Elon Musk's name appeared across headlines, not just as a businessman, but as a symbol of persistence, a man who dared to defy logic in pursuit of something unreasonable that he knew in his heart was right. But amidst all the praise, the applause, the media frenzy, one man sat quietly in his old library, reopening the essay now reprinted in the National Journal of Education. Harold Benson. He turned each page slowly, as if reading a fairy tale, one where he himself had once played the antagonist. Yet rather than shame, he felt something unexpected: relief. Because his greatest mistake as a teacher had somehow planted the seed for one of the greatest triumphs in a student's life. At Elon's first press conference after the approval, as he stood before hundreds of reporters and thousands of flashing lights, someone asked, "Who inspired you most on this journey?" Elon paused for a few seconds, then smiled. "A former teacher, someone who once told me that imagination doesn't feed anyone." The room fell silent, but Elon continued. "That one sentence taught me that imagination only matters if you're brave enough to make it real. And I spent 10 years doing just that. So if my teacher's watching this, thank you. Because if you hadn't rejected me, I might not have tried this hard." It wasn't sarcasm, it was a genuine thank you. Because Elon understood, without that rejection, without the harsh lesson from a man he once admired, he might never have learned how to rise, might never have learned to listen to himself amid the noise, might never have turned pain into fuel, or those torn up pages into blueprints for a future beyond Earth. From a student once mocked for writing a naive, unrealistic essay, Elon Musk had become the man redefining reality itself. That childhood dream was no longer just a dream. It now had a name, a shape, an engine, and a launch pad. And the world, instead of scoffing, could only look up, because no one could deny what had happened. No one could argue with a rocket in the sky. That story, with all its pain, silence, persistence, and courage, was not merely one man's victory. It was a declaration to an entire generation. You don't need to be understood at the beginning. You just need to believe long enough, work hard enough, and protect the fire in your heart, so that one day the very world that laughed at you will have no choice but to recognize you. Elon Musk was no longer a student. He had become a symbol, and the future is not far. Once graded a C-, now appeared boldly on the front page of the Global Science Yearbook, a living testament that imagination is not a weakness. It is the very first doorway to the greatest things humanity can achieve. It is the very first he chose to walk his path quietly, to learn, to build, and to slowly turn the imagination that had once been laughed at into a reality others couldn't help but respect. It was that very silence, that unwavering resolve, that forged a symbol. Elon didn't change himself to gain acceptance. He became more of himself, stronger, more grounded, and in the end, impossible to ignore. And perhaps deep down, all of us have once been Elon. We've all had dreams that were mocked, been judged by a glance, or thought about giving up just to blend in. But Elon proved something powerful. Greatness isn't defined by being accepted immediately. It's defined by the courage to keep going when no one else believes, and the strength to believe in yourself when the world turns its back. A way to the greatest things humanity can achieve. He chose to walk his path quietly, to learn, to build, and to slowly turn the imagination that had once been laughed at into a reality others couldn't help but respect. It was that very silence, that unwavering resolve that forged a symbol. Elon didn't change himself to gain acceptance. He became more of himself, stronger, more grounded, and in the end, impossible to ignore. And perhaps deep down, all of us have once been Elon. We've all had dreams that were mocked, been judged by a glance, or thought about giving up just to blend in. But Elon proved something powerful. Greatness isn't defined by being accepted immediately. It's defined by the courage to keep going when no one else believes, and the strength to believe in yourself when the world turns its back. As for Harold Benson, the teacher who once criticized Elon and reduced his dream to a letter grade, he too underwent a profound transformation. He learned that an essay doesn't define a person, and that the power of a dream lies not in how it begins, but in how it is pursued with grit and faith. Perhaps in the moment Harold signed a plus on the new version of "The Future Is Not Far," he wasn't simply grading a project. He was correcting a past mistake. He was completing a personal journey, learning at last to see not just through standards, but through humility and with heart. The story of Elon and Harold is not just about a student and a teacher. It's a symbol of the clash between the old and the new, between limited logic and boundless imagination, between fear of difference and the courage to stay true to oneself. And perhaps the greatest lesson it leaves behind is this: never underestimate someone just because they dare to dream, and never mock a dream, because that very dream may one day rewrite the future.